manuscript, sometimes that fee is nominal. There's not a whole lot of money in publishing poetry. If you're really interested in making money, become a fiction writer immediately, or preferably a doctor. So, yeah, and I don't think most of the poets who are doing it for the money.
It should be said, though, I don't think you're going to make money with poetry books, and in general there isn't a lot of money in poetry, but there are journals that do pay pretty well per poem or per page, or based off how many lines you have. It's going to tend to be the higher end journals that are well funded and well established, like a journal like Poetry pays very nicely. I think Kenyon Review pays, Gettysburg, Southern Review. Yeah, basically the older journals with some history tend to have a little bit more funding. They probably tend to be university affiliated as well. And I feel like most of them in their submission guidelines will tell you if they pay. The majority of places, however, can only give you contributor copies. So they'll send you 2 copies of the journal, and you pet them on your shelf and say, oh, if only you were money.
Any other questions?
I'm going to address maybe e-publishing, because that's kind of a hot topic right now for authors.
And one that we're thinking a lot about. In the poetry world, e-publishing it hasn't been fully realized, because the poem on the page is fundamentally different than prose. And if you change the width of a page for a piece of prose, you change the margins, the paragraph gets longer, that's great. You can't necessarily do that with poems, and there is no good standard just yet for translating poems into ebooks in such a way that you're going to preserve the visual quality of the piece. And so we're not seeing as many books of poems move into ebook form. Now there are some out there, and certainly I think larger presses have had some more resources to try that. They've also looked at poems that are a little more conservative on the page just in terms of their physical forms, but it's really difficult to guarantee that the poem will be represented on the page the same way on a 7-inch tablet, on a computer screen, and on a 3.5-inch screen on your phone. And that's one, as we kind of think about, wouldn't it be great to do some ebooks at Bull City Press? We've been really conservative in our action because we don't ever want one of our authors to see their work in a format and say, but that's not what it's supposed to look like. We can control the page proofs and then what gets printed.
Well, you can rasterize a page, but then how do you read it out here?
Exactly, exactly.
And the rasterization, obviously represents the page much better, but
it does.
And I've read some very nice books, ebooks, that were rasterized, and they look exactly like a real page, apart from the fact that it's on the screen. But if you take it to another medium, then what happens? You don't know.
Exactly. And so, PDFs, so the PDF format will represent, because it does rasterize, but when you get it onto a small screen, sometimes what you're asking the reader to do is zoom in and then sort of follow the page around, which I'm not sure is a superior reading experience. Now, I suppose that there's a really good argument to be made that if the reader chooses to view the poem on that device, well, why wouldn't you want them to have that, giving control to the reader? And I think that's great, but at the same time, we want to make sure that everything we do is beautiful and it's a wonderful reading experience, because we feel like design is a big part of what we do. We're really proud of having books that are fabulous objects. We're really proud of the fact that our magazine is handmade. So it makes me sound like a Luddite. And it's not uncommon for me to talk to people in bars about this. And I, on Tuesday night, got into a very heated conversation with a bookseller who does not believe in ebooks at all. And I said, what do you think? I think ebooks are wonderful. I love reading on my iPad. I love reading on my phone. And part of what I love about that is that I can take literature anywhere, that I do have some control over the reading experience. I can make the fonts larger, smaller. I can backlight the fonts. So, you know, if you feel like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth, in some ways I am. But I also view what we do as different from a lot of the reading that I do. When I read a piece of prose, I'm not married to how it looks on the page, with a few exceptions, obviously. You know, there are books, and I think of Jennifer Egan's A Visit from the Goon Squad as a book that absolutely had to be presented in a certain way to work. And I know that that they worked really hard on the ebook version.
I don't know if you've heard of an app called Poem Flow.
I haven't.
Okay, well, it's generally speaking, you can present a poem in an interactive format that's self-running. So if you choose a poem to read, it comes up and feeds you the lines in the poem, but it does so in a creative way, rather than, you know, just presenting the poem lines, you know, right up on the page. You know, they kind of fade in and fade out on top of each other, and that sort of thing. You can structure it the way that you want to, I think, is the point.
Cool.
There's an
It's called
interactivity.
So it's
Poem Flow?
displaying
Poem
one
Flow.
line at a time?
Hmm?
It's displaying one line at a time?
Yeah, displaying one line at a
Fading
time.
in and fading out?
Right, yeah, and it's an iPhone application, so I don't know if there's another version of it out there, but it's pretty interesting. But I mean, at the same time, you know, as a lover of books, it's not quite the same thing. You know, it's nice to have the feel of paper, the smell, the feel of it, you know, seeing it in front of you in the format. You know, because I'm a graphic designer and that's my forte. You know, and I appreciate a well-designed piece of paper. You know, so.
And there's room for both experiences. I think that's what's wonderful about the current environment. The technology is going to get better and better for representing these things in ways that authors and publishers can give readers that experience that they want them to have, and control that experience in such a way that the reading experience is part of the art object. You know, that it is not just the manuscript, but also the value that great design does add to a reading experience. I don't think it's fully realized yet for poetry, but it will be, because the devices that we'll read on in 10 years will be so dramatically different from the devices that we read on now.
But we should say that outside of e-publishing for chapbooks and books, I think there's been a real renaissance in terms of journals that are now online for poetry. I mean, it's just bloomed in the last 10 years. It's gone everywhere. And I think initially, and this is still sometimes a problem, you were seeing a lot of journals show up and they'd be there for a year or two and then they'd kind of shutter, and you're like, oh, but that was my publication, it's gone. And this is very sad. But now we're seeing journals that really have stuck around and have a lot of staying power and are starting to gain real prestige as well. I think there's still a preference to print in terms of prestige, but there are many online journals which have quite a bit of clout. And in terms of being a poet and having readership, some of those online journals
Far exceed
oh my gosh.
print circulations.
Yeah. I mean, it just... sorry, I'm getting inarticulate just because I'm on Twitter, and if I had a poem come out on an online journal, I'll suddenly get like so many new followers, and they're like tweeting lines from the poems, and I'm going, oh my goodness. This does not happen when my poems come out in print. I'll get some. It's nice. And those journals do, I think if they have a good online presence, you'll see some of that stuff coming out regardless, referring people back to the print. But certainly with online journals, there's a real buzz of activity around them, which can be really gratifying as well.
And I think some of the reason that they initially lacked prestige is actually, it comes from the Academy. That originally online publication wasn't given much weight in terms of, you know, publishing for tenure or whatever. And that's melting away. It's not, we're not all the way there yet. But I think that that's improving in terms of what the Academy will give poets credit for. And so, you know, every time, you know, you make there's a snowball effect, I think. Every time you push forward in the Academy, then outside of the academy, those sites see a bump in the increase in quality, and that just keeps going back and forth.
But I think it's similar with online journals, just as you would for a print journal. Look at who they're publishing. Ask yourself, are these people I would want to see my work alongside of? Just because not only do you want your work alongside people that you admire, but you want a place that's going to stay, that you feel good about being in, and you have to think long term. Because in theory, it's going to stay up for a long time. So I think that when people first started publishing more online, I think some poets were kind of tempted to like kind of give throwaway poems, like, oh, it's just an online journal, it doesn't matter. But now somebody Googles your name, and there's your throwaway poem that you don't think very much about at the top of the list. So I actually think quite seriously when I send a poem to an online journal, because I don't want anything that's going to embarrass me in 5 years. And you're always changing as a writer, or at least I hope you are. And you want your work 5 years from now to be better than what you were doing. So I at least want to look back and say, like, that is the best poem I could write at that point in my life. Not, man, that, I really should have spell checked that.
And that's true. That's true in print or online. You know, you never want poems out in the world that you're not really happy with. And of course, any writer will grow, and 5 years from now, you should look back on those poems and say, well, gosh, I'm a lot better now. Of course, you've got 5 more years experience writing poetry. You had better be better after 5 years. But you also don't want to look back and say, oh, I feel queasy that this is available in the world. And another mistake that I think some people make is if an editor solicits your work, send them great poems. That's what they want to get. But I know that some writers make the mistake of saying, oh, well, if they're already very interested in my work, then this will be an easy publication for me. So I'll send maybe this B-list, where it's not my best, but I'll go ahead and send it to them because I've clearly already got it in. And I think that's a huge mistake. Huge. Yeah. Any other things that you guys are thinking about?
I have another question pertaining to ebooks. I understand that you can submit them yourself for publication. That sort of cuts out the middleman, as it were, which would be you guys. So the question is, do you have a plan in the future to go that route?
When you say submit them yourself, do you mean to a place like Amazon?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What I would say in regards to that is Amazon is very, very large.
Right.
And your book is just going to disappear in there unless
Just like
you
in the river.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, you kind of would have to have a full-time job of promoting your book, just in hopes of someone seeing it. And again, you're promoting a book of poetry, which it's sometimes more challenging than we would like to get people to take a look at your book of poetry. And then if you think about how many books are on Amazon, I mean, I can look at the Amazon seller rank of my book, which, supposedly, does have a publisher behind it, and it is a very big number. I am not near the top. It's very big. And those ebooks that are being published with no one promoting them and no one saying, hey, have you heard of this book? I'm going to tell you about it in our newsletter. Like, they're just lost. So I don't want to speak for you in this, but in terms of being involved with publishing, those are not books that concern me as competition, because unfortunately no one's seeing them. So I think there are probably a lot of advantages in self-publishing, but I think it's something that people would want to go into with their eyes very open and thinking about, all right, what's my plan with this? If I'm doing this, how am I going to make sure people know about this book? How am I going to get this book disseminated? So I think that it can be a really good thing.
I see people using their Facebook pages to promote their work, but what's the maximum you could have is 5,000 friends if you were insane on there. but I have 3,500 maybe, but there's no way that more than 1% of them would even consider buying my book. You know?
And I mean, even though you've got those 5,000 friends, and even if you were to post between the hours of 10 to 2, which I think is the most common time for people to be on social media, assuming that's in your time zone and not, you know, you're not missing those other time zones where people are still waking up or asleep. All those 5,000 friends don't see your item show up in their feed because something else has pushed it away. And the pages that people make devoted to their books or to their press, since those were initially geared at businesses, you may have read articles about how Facebook has changed the algorithm. So the Bull City Press page, I think you can
killed
speak.
us, yeah. I mean, we used to, when we would post an item, we would see, 1,800, 2,500 people would see that item, and then at one point in November they changed the algorithm, and 25 people were seeing similar posts, and it was just like, what on earth has happened? And that, they control that. I'm actually a little more.
You're more optimistic.
I'm more optimistic about
I'm a naysayer.
self-publishing and e-publishing. It's not for me, and it is absolutely the right decision for some people. I think what Becky said about the fact that if you're going to do it, it has to become your business. And I think a lot of artists are not comfortable with being in business around their work. They view their art not as a commodity. And I don't judge anybody who does. I think that that is totally okay, because I think as booksellers we have to do a little bit of that. And that's why I can talk about the design experience and the reading experience of our book as being something that we add in the process to an already beautiful manuscript. And I don't feel bad about saying I want all of those things in place for the reading experience. If you feel really confident, I think that's great. I think one thing that a lot of people who self-publish lose, and I think this is a sad loss, is they lose an editor who will challenge them. A lot of people who self-publish will pay for editorial services, but when you are the client of your editor, they have a different responsibility to tell you things, and they will also gauge your willingness to hear those things. Whereas an editor with a publishing house is going to put things in very different terms for you because they have a very different objective, which is the financial health of an institution as opposed to an individual. And those are different concerns. I think also people who self-publish lose some of the services the press can provide. We're very small. We don't provide a ton of publicity for our authors. We try to do really well by our authors, but I can guarantee you that there are a million things that I would kill to be able to do that we don't have the staffing or the dollars to do for our authors. I wish we could do more. And when one of us wins the lottery, that may happen. If you're willing to take on all of those things yourself and you're never going to miss that, I think self-publishing is great. It bears mention that you will hear these self-publishing success stories, almost always novelists. 90% of them have written something with a vampire in it. The other 10%, there's graphic getting it on.
If you
Well, no, there's
there's
a consent. Yeah, there's a Venn diagram there.
Good.
Yeah.
I buy that book.
But no, I mean, but you do hear some very prominent success stories of people who self-published, but the odds of that are astronomical. I mean,
winning the lottery.
Yeah, it is a lot like winning the lottery. Certainly those people had some business savvy, because you simply cannot be successful without some real savvy. But for every one of those people who has sold 20,000, 100,000 copies, or sold enough that a publisher got interested in their next book, there are thousands and thousands and thousands who put up their ebook and sold 30. And probably most of them were thrilled. They're like, yeah, my book is out there, it's in the world, I'm having the dialogue I wanted to have, and they're not worried that they have 30 readers. If that is an acceptable outcome, that's fine. I think traditional publishers probably guarantee you a floor, but not a ceiling. And I don't know that floor is necessarily large by any means. But yeah, I'm still optimistic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, to me, writing is a joy, and especially when it's done, because getting there is a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
So, to me, that hard work should be compensated. And, somebody is willing to pay for the work, if it's good work, then they should be paid fairly, for that, in the sense that by best practices and standards in the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think every publisher wants to take care of their authors. Well, okay, not every publisher. There are probably some who don't care at all. But in the world that I think we walk in, the presses that we consider peers, we definitely we see a lot of authors that really do care about that. I'm sorry, a lot of publishers. So I think we've been talking for a really long time. We've got a reading coming up at 7:30. Thank you guys for amazing questions tonight. That was absolutely wonderful, and we really appreciate it. We've got some Bull City books over here, so before the reading starts, hopefully you'll come and check them out. We've got Becky's books as well, and we've got copies of Inch Magazine. So thanks for coming.